Hi everyone, it's Erin from the Provincial Farmhouse. In today's video, I've put together a collection of my top 5 decoupage projects of 2023. Make sure you let me know if your favourite was in today's video. For our next project, I'm going to be using this piece of wood that I had in my stash, and I'm also going to be using some drop cloth. I'm measuring out how much I need. You can see that I'm starting off the cut and then I'm tearing the edges. I want a primitive look for these, and I want the drop cloth to sit on the inside. I want some of that wood showing around the edges, so I'm just tearing it until I have it to the size I want. I'm then going to take some simple golden tacks, some thumbtacks, and I'm just sticking them into some cardboard so that I can take it outside and I can spray these with some of Rust-Oleum's black spray paint. If you haven't guessed already, we're creating a primitive style artwork. I'm using some rice paper by Would You Bend. This is called the Cottage Cart. I need to get rid of the excess paper from around the edge, so I've got some water on an artist brush. And I'm tracing a line down the side there where I want to rip the paper. I want a torn edge here because we are trying to create what looks like a painted canvas. So I need that line to be a little bit more organic. So I'm just going to add that water where I want it to go, and then I'm going to tear it off. Now this rice paper is a little bit thicker, so it does take a little bit more water to be able to tear the paper away. For this project, I'm going to be decoupaging this rice paper onto the drop cloth. I don't know how it would work with your more traditional tissue paper. This rice paper is a little bit thicker, so I feel like I'm going to have a bit more success with it. I'm laying down a thick coat of Dixie Belle's flat clear coat. You can see I'm working in sections, and then I'm taking a ball of cling wrap and smoothing that rice paper down on top of the section that has the product. Any areas that I miss, I'll lift up and I'll add a little bit more of that product. So I'm going to repeat the same process and work my way across until I have all of that rice paper adhered down. So again, this is meant to look like a painted canvas that an artist has then torn off the canvas frame and mounted on some wood. I was inspired by some pictures that I saw on Pinterest and thought I would give it a go. Now, this rice paper is a little bit thicker, so again, I don't know how you'd go with tissue paper. I feel that you may actually get a bit of tearing. I think it'd be something you'd have to experiment with. So I have all of my image down, and now I'm going to go around the edges and add more of that flat clear coat, and I'm going over the top of my image as well to seal it all in. Now I have got it sitting on the wood that we're going to use, but it's not going to get stuck there. The product is still wet underneath. I just didn't want it laying down on that brown paper and have it getting stuck there. Once this was dry, I took the little canvas and started scrunching it to create some lines and to create some age. So you can see that it's crinkling the paper a little bit. And then I'm going to also take some fine grit sandpaper and gently rub it over the top of that rice paper. This is going to create more of a worn look. Again, I want this to look like an old piece of art that was found in maybe a French artist's workshop. I just sort of had a really primitive look in mind. So this sandpaper is really going to help us achieve that look. Next, I'm going to apply one coat of Dixie Belle's Umber Silk Mineral Paint over the entire piece of my wood. I'm going to put it down the sides as well because they look a little bit unfinished. And this has a built-in top coat, so I'm not going to have to add a clear coat over the top. Once that's dry, I can add my artwork. So I'm going to lay it down in the position where I want it to go, and I'm going to be using those little thumbtacks that we spray painted black. I'm going to position them in each of the corners and then use a hammer to hammer them in place. So this is what's going to hold our little canvas art in place. And it's also going to look really good. It looks really primitive. So I'm going to just work my way around and add those tacks in the spots where I want them to go. Once I have all my little tacks in place, I did start to fuss at the edges a little bit. I started to pull some more of those little strands away. Again, just adding to that primitive and worn look. I wanted to age the fabric around the outside of the artwork a little bit more, so I'm using some of Dixie Belle's Au Naturel Voodoo Gel Stain. I started applying it around the edges and then felt like maybe it was a little bit too thick, so I did grab a little cap full of water. I added a little bit of that to my Au Naturel stain, and then I started adding it around the edges. You can see any time that I get it on the artwork itself or on our little tacks, I just use my finger to blend it a little bit, because I do want those tacks to look a little bit older with the stain on it, but I don't want it to look too obvious. So I'm just going to work my way around the edges until I have covered all of the outside of our artwork. I also then came in with my brown wax brush. I never washed this, so it just has little remnants of that wax, and I just sort of dabbed it around the edges. And finally, to make sure I didn't have any really obvious creases, I put down some baking paper and I used an iron-on cotton setting to smooth out any wrinkles. I'll also attach a hanger on the back. And here's our finished artwork. I love how this turned out. I feel like it really does look like it came from an old artist's workshop in the French countryside. Let me know what you think of this project in the comments. For our first project, I'm going to be using this watering can from IKEA. I always love to work on these when I can find them. My first step was to spray this with Rust-Oleum's Clear Matte Sealer to prime it for painting, and then I'm using Dixie Belle's Drop Cloth Chalk Mineral Paint to paint the center part of the watering can. So I'm not going to be painting the handle, the top part, or the spout with this color. Next, I'm going to be using Dixie Belle's Juniper Limited Edition Fall Color. I'm using a small artist brush to apply this to the spout of the watering can. I'm also going to be adding the same color to the handle and the top part. I really love this green. It is a beautiful natural tone that is going to go beautifully with the decoupage paper that I've selected for today's projects. Remember, you can find a full product list in the description below and all of these products on our website, theprovincialfarmhouse.com.au. Next, I'm going to be using Roycycled's new Fall Botanical Project Blocks decoupage paper. Next, I need to work out what part of the paper I'm going to use. So I'm lining it up on the watering can, and then once I've worked that out, I'm going to use some water on a small artist brush to trace out the section that I want. I'm then able to very carefully tear along that waterline. Because of the shape of this project, I'm going to have to piece these different sections together, and it's always best to work with a torn line. So you can see I'm tearing this straight edge here to help it blend in better. Now I'm going to position it on my watering can, and I'm going to be using Dixie Belle's Flat Clear Coat as my decoupage medium today. So I'm laying down a section and then I'm using a ball of cling wrap to carefully press down. Now, something else that is a really good idea is to lightly mist your paper with water. This helps the paper to expand and be a little bit more flexible, but obviously you need to be very gentle while you're doing this. You can see that I'm holding the paper up while my other hand is pressing down on the paper and pushing the paper into the product. Here I'm using that artist brush again to tear the paper so that I can manipulate it around the handle. And again, any little pieces that I tear off, I'm able to almost collage them over areas where maybe the paper was a little bit torn or there's a small gap. So this is definitely something that I'm piecing together, but those torn edges are really going to help this look like a more seamless design. Now I'm going to be organizing the next section for the other side of the watering can. So you can see I'm using that paintbrush with the water so that I can tear the section that I want. And you can see again here around the spout that I'm using that same little paintbrush with the water on it so that I can tear my paper so that I can have it cut in a way that's going to fit the watering can, and I do not chuck out any of my pieces. I keep them so that I can piece them back together. Here you can see I have this little part, I'm tearing it to make sure it fits in the gap, and then I'm decoupaging it down. When we get to the other side, I'm adding some product where the paper's going to meet. I've already misted my paper so that it is flexible, and I'm going to position it around the spout, and I'm pressing down, and any areas where I've got excess paper, I'm able to very carefully tear that off and then reposition it to fill in those little gaps. And here I had some overlap, so I'm very carefully going to tear off that excess paper, and because we have that line that's been torn, those pages can blend together a lot better than if I had a straight line. So again, I'm misting that paper and very carefully pulling it around. Now, this particular section got a little bit tricky. Obviously, we're dealing with a rounded surface. So you can see I'm tearing this little bird away, being careful to go around the detail so that I can put that little bird back. We're going to reposition this piece, and again, because of that torn edge, it will look a lot more seamless than if I'd cut it out straight. So I'm repositioning the bird, and as I'm doing this, I'm making sure that it's not going to impact the image underneath. So I'm going to tear a little bit more of that paper off so that the little bird's tail is visible. And then I'm going to add some more of my flat clear coat so that I can put the rest of the paper down and adhere it. Here you can see this sweet little owl was going to be cut off. So I just tear the whole piece off, and then I'm going to be able to reposition that sweet little owl. I didn't want to lose that one, so I'm going to very carefully tear that image out and reposition it under the handle. Once I have all my decoupage paper down, I'm going to very carefully tear off the excess paper down the bottom. I'm then going to apply another coat of Dixie Belle's flat clear coat over the entire section where I have the decoupage paper to seal that all in. I want to add some detail to the top of the watering can, so I have taken out my primitive mold by IOD. I'm dusting the sections that I'm going to cast with cornstarch, and then I'm working my air dry clay into those sweet little leaves on the left there. I'm going to be casting quite a few of these. I want to add a few of them to the top, so I just tend to cast a bunch of them so that I've got a lot to work with, and then anything that I don't use I can just put back in my container with my other clay. Next, I want to cast that delicate trim down the bottom, so I'm rolling my clay into a sausage sort of a shape, and then I'm very carefully pressing that clay into the mold. So you can see as I'm scraping some of the excess clay off, I'm working it into the rest of the mold. And then once I have the entire area filled, I'll flex that mold and very carefully pull it out. I'm going to have to cast 2 of these because we're going to be putting them around the top of the watering can. So I'm going to use a very strong glue to glue these down. You can see I apply the glue and then I use my finger to spread it along all of the clay, and then I'm going to position it on the top of the watering can. And as we don't have enough here, I'm going to use part of the other one that I cast. I'm gluing that down and pulling off any of the excess. Here you can see that I'm starting to have a play with how I want to position the leaves. I thought about adding that little flower, decided against it, and so I'm just going to position those 2 different sized leaves on the top, and once I've worked out where I want them to go, I'm going to use that same wood glue to glue them down. I used IOD's primitive mold today, but they have a lot of other molds that have leaf designs that you could use instead, or maybe you could go in a different direction and add transfers or stamps or stencils to the top. This is really a project that you could really customize and make your own if you're going to give this a try. Once I have all of the leaves glued to the top, I decided that I would be focusing on the section where the spout meets the rest of the watering can. I've already cast some of the longer leaf designs, so I've added some glue where I want them to go. And then I'm carefully applying them along the seam where the spout meets the watering can, adding some little leaves and the longer leaves and framing it out. Next, I'm going to be using that same Juniper chalk mineral paint to very carefully paint over the top of my wet castings. These are not completely dry, but I find that if I add the paint before my castings are completely dry, I get less cracking. It slows down the drying process of the clay, which means we get less separation and cracking. So I'm very carefully going in and adding paint to all of those areas. If I get some paint on the section that does not have that paint, say down on the decoupage paper, because I've already sealed that paper, I am able to come in with a baby wipe and I can wipe off the excess that's gone where I don't want it to go. So that's why I wasn't worried about adding my paint after I had glued my castings down. Here I'm using an even smaller artist brush to paint the details around the spout of the watering can. If you wanted, you could use resin for this instead of clay. I like to use clay because it's a lot more flexible, it's easier to glue down, but if you wanted, you could paint your resin castings before you glue them on. I don't find that I can paint clay castings before I put them on. I feel like they're a bit too delicate and I would damage the details if they weren't already glued on something. But again, this is up to you if you're going to give this project a try. The next day, once my paint was completely dry, I sealed my entire piece with Dixie Belle's Gloss Clear Coat. This is going to seal in the paint nicely, and it's also going to be a great base for our next step. To age this a little bit, I'm going to be using Dixie Belle's White Wash Glaze. This is going to give the piece a little bit of an oxidized, weathered look. So I'm adding it over the top of our dry gloss clear coat. I'm working it into the details, and then I have a baby wipe and I'm wiping back the excess. This is going to be a very subtle look. If you wanted to be a bit more dramatic, a bit more grungy, you could use a dark glaze, or you could go in the other direction. You could use a wax and use an antiquing wax. I wanted this to be a little bit more subtle. I didn't want to tone that green down too much. This is just going to add a little bit of age, and it's also going to highlight the beautiful details of those castings. I'm adding that whitewash glaze to the details on the water spout down the bottom there, and I'm also going to be adding them to the water spout itself and the handle. Again, this is going to give a really lovely aged metal look. And here's our finished watering can. I love how this turned out. That decoupage paper is definitely a new favorite, and it goes beautifully with the IOD molds. Let me know what you think of this project in the comments. Our next project is this little wooden box, and I thought it would make a great planter box. After cleaning, I'm going to give this little box 2 coats of Dixie Belle's cotton chalk mineral paint. I'm only painting the outside though, because that's where our decoupage paper is going to go. We're going to be using Roycycled's new corrugated metal decoupage paper. I love this design. It's so rustic. Perfect if you like a farmhouse style. So I'm just working out what elements I want to add, because obviously there's bits of the paper that's less rusty. I love anything rusty and old, so I've picked this side first. I'm just creasing where I'm going to need to cut it with my fingers, and then I'm going to trim it out with my scissors. Next, I'm grabbing my Dixie Belle flat clear coat and I'm going to lay down a strip of product, and then I'm going to smooth it out with some cling wrap. So I'm just repeating the same steps as before. This is the wet method. This is the method that I tend to use the most because it's the quickest. You could always do the iron-on method. It really is up to you and your preference. So again, I'm just smoothing it down and being sure that I'm not getting any air bubbles. I'm not worried about wrinkles because most of the time, majority of the wrinkles disappear as the paper dries, because wrinkles, as you probably know, are caused by the paper expanding, and when it contracts back down, often it disappears. So I'm going to be repeating the same steps for the different sides of the box. So here you can see I am measuring out a piece for the other side. I did make sure that the other side was dry before I started on this side. I didn't want the product getting stuck to the brown paper that I have underneath. So that's just something to keep in mind when you're doing a piece with multiple sides. You can see here that I'm trimming off the edges of excess decoupage paper with some fine grit sandpaper. I'm doing this on each of my dry decoupage paper on each of the sides before I add paper to the little ends there. So I'm just making sure that I've got off all the excess before I start. So I'm just measuring up the little ends there that I need, and I'm going to cut both pieces that I need, and then I'm going to start decoupaging. Given that these sections are a bit smaller, I am just going to lay down the product over the entire space and then position the paper and smooth it out. Because it's a smaller surface, I'm not worried about air bubbles or missing any areas with product. Once those sides are dry, I'm coming in with that fine grit sandpaper again, just to trim off some of the excess. I'm then going to seal all of the decoupaged sides with Dixie Belle's flat clear coat. Finally, I've decided I'm painting the inside with Dixie Belle's Umber Silk Mineral Paint. I decided to do this because there was some permanent marker writing on the inside. I didn't really like how that looked, so I thought this was a much nicer finish. So I'm applying it with a synthetic brush and a smaller artist brush around the edges so that I can be a bit tidier. So I'm going to apply a coat on the inside, and then when that's dry, I'm coming in with another coat, and I will also paint the bottom. I actually liked the look of the lighter wood showing through, so I'm doing just a little bit of wet distressing here. As I was creating this project, I definitely saw it as a little wooden planter box. So I thought that this color umber, which is a sort of dark brown, suited this project perfectly. And here's our finished planter box. I just love this decoupage paper. It's amazing how realistic that corrugated metal design looks. I had a few people as I was working on this say that they thought it was actually a metal planter box. Let me know what you think of this project in the comments. Our final project is this wooden sign. I got it for $3. It's quite heavy, so it's very solid, and it already has some attachments in the back for hanging. My first step is to cover the entire piece with 2 coats of Dixie Belle's cotton chalk mineral paint. Again, I love this as a base for decoupage paper. Next, we're going to be using the new Ephemeral Burlap decoupage paper. We're going to be using the darker design out of the two, so I've still got the other one to use on something else. So I'm going to separate the two designs, and I decided that I would do this with some water on an artist brush. So I just used my mister to get a bit of water in a container, and then I'm just making a little fine line to separate. I find that uneven lines just look a lot more organic. Design-wise, it's just it's just preferable. Next, I'm going to start actually doing a bit of tearing. I want this to look like an old weathered sign, and plus the design doesn't fit perfectly on the board that I have, so I've got to make it work. So I'm just using the water on the artist brush to pick random areas to tear the paper away. So I just tried to think where natural wear would occur on a sign, and I've just picked the corners and the tops and certain areas so that it looks like over time this is a sign that has weathered and the surface below is peeking through. And this is just a really great idea if you don't have enough of your decoupage paper to fit and you want to make a sign, you can make it look weathered. This is a great way to do this. I also had those old French wall panels in my mind, or old wallpaper. That was definitely my inspiration for this piece. You can see I'm making a little pile on the left there. I'm keeping all of these pieces. We're going to bring some of them back together up the top and down the bottom. Once I have all my pieces organised, I'm going to start applying Dixie Belle's flat clear coat to adhere the centerpiece. Again, I'm just working in sections, and I found the paper was pulling quite a bit at the edges, so I used my mister to dampen the paper as I was doing this. So for this project, I definitely do not mind if there are some wrinkles. I think it will just add to the look of age that I'm going for. Now I'm going to come in with some of those other pieces that we tore off, and I'm positioning some down the bottom and just again using that cling wrap to smooth it down. There's not really a right or wrong way to go about this. It's really just thinking in your mind what something might look like if it aged over time. So it's definitely just something that you want to play with if you're going to give this project a try. Once I have all my little pieces down, I'm going to come in with a coat of Dixie Belle's flat clear coat over the whole thing. I felt like the cotton chalk mineral paint was a bit too bright for the look, so I'm coming in with Dixie Belle's Burlap chalk mineral paint. It's just like it sounds, it's like burlap, that's the tone that it is. So I'm coming in with a coat of this first, and I'm using an artist brush, and I'm using a dabbing and sort of stippling motion so that I don't have any harsh lines where my decoupage paper is on the board. So I'm just stippling, and you can see again it just sort of mimics the look of ripped paper anyway. So I'm going to fill in all of the areas where the cotton paint is. Once the burlap is dry, I'm coming in with Dixie Belle's drop cloth, which is a lovely antique white, and I'm going over the top of the burlap just to bring in another tone. It just makes it look more realistic, like there's old plaster behind this design. I'm not completely covering the burlap tone. Again, this is just sort of a layered look here. Once the drop cloth layer was dry, I sealed the entire thing again with flat clear coat. I wanted to bring some age to the areas that we just painted, so I first tried using the Grunge Glaze by Dixie Belle, but I didn't feel like it gave as much age as I was hoping. So I did try it out on all of the areas, but again, it just didn't have a deep enough tone that I wanted. So I decided to use Dixie Belle's Tobacco Road Voodoo Gel Stain. This is a water-based product, and I am wiping it on, and then I'm using a wet wipe to dab and wipe off some of the excess. Again, this is just going to give a lovely aged look, and this is definitely a better tone. While the Voodoo gel stain is still wet, I'm coming in with Dixie Belle's Charcoal Dixie Dirt. This is a powder form product that you add to make it look like something's dirty. It's literally like it sounds. It's sort of like you're adding some dirt to your piece. So I'm just adding that, and a lot of that will also come off, but while your product is wet, it will adhere. You could also use a wax for this. And here's our finished wall art. I just love how this turned out. This is definitely one of my new favorite papers to use. Let me know what you think of this project in the comments. My first step for today's project is to create some frames. I've got these couple of silicone molds here. I will link them in the description below. And now I'm mixing up my fast cast resin. This is very similar to Amazing Casting Resin. You mix up part A with part B, stir them together really well for about 30 seconds, and then you carefully pour them into your silicone molds. Now this particular resin takes about 10 to 12 minutes to cure. You'll know it's ready when it turns a white. I'm then very carefully going to pour the resin into the molds. I'm using a flexible silicone little cup there, and I have my silicone mat underneath. So I'm just going to take my time doing this, and the silicone cups are really good because you can squeeze the cup together and that then slows the pour of the resin. It's also recommended that you wear gloves while doing this and that you do it in a well-ventilated area. You can see that my molds have turned white here. They've been sitting for a while, and now I'm going to flex my mold and carefully pull my castings out. I'm going to be making 2 castings of this particular mold. The top part of this casting felt a bit flimsy, so I decided to just very carefully tear it off. Now I need to add a base to the center. To do this, I'm going to mix up some more of my resin mixture. I'm not exactly sure the exact amount that I'm going to need, so I'm trying to pour a little bit extra out. I'm going to give that a stir. I have my frame castings on a silicone mat, which means whatever I pour on there, I'm going to be able to pull back. So I'm going to tape down my castings with some masking tape. I'm going to try my best to get my mat as flat as possible. And once I'm sure that I have those castings secured in place, I'm going to carefully pour my resin into the center. A little bit of resin will probably seep underneath, but for the most part, it's going to stay in the center as long as the center of your frame has a really good border that's going to stop that resin from going much further. And you don't want to pour too much in. Here you can see that my resin is starting to set up, and because I have a border around the center that's not broken and it's tall enough, the resin is staying in place. After about 10 minutes, my resin is set in the center. I'm going to carefully take away the masking tape and then carefully pull my casting up. And because we have it on that silicone mat, it's going to stick to the frame and not the mat below. Now on this one, there is a little bit of a thin part, but it doesn't matter too much. We're going to paint over the top of it, and it's definitely solid enough for our craft today. I also made a second one of that other design. Before we move on, I wanted to show you how to do this same technique with one of the IOD molds. This is the frames mold. I am pouring the resin out. You can see my casting is ready. I have it on my silicone mat. I'm taping it in place. And this one does not have a center to it, so I thought it was a good idea to show you guys how you can add a back to this shape and this design as well. So you can see I'm adding a decent amount of masking tape there just to hold it in place. It'll also slow any resin that seeps underneath. And now I'm going to switch to Amazing Casting Resin. I ran out of the other resin that I was using, but it's the same premise. Mix part A with part B, stir for about 30 seconds, and then I'm going to very carefully pour that mixture into the center. In this particular frame, you can see that I did have an area in the center there that didn't have quite as much resin. So I'm going to carefully pull it up from the silicone mat. I probably could have left it, but I'm going to show you guys here how you can patch that up. I've turned it over. There is a little bit of an indent because the resin's a bit thinner. I've mixed a little bit more of my Amazing Casting Resin, and I'm just pouring some and spreading some out in that area so it will thicken that section up. And that's definitely done the trick. This will be ready to be painted a bit later on. Next, I'm going to start work on our beautiful oval frames. They're beautiful and ornate. I'm going to give each of these a coat of Dixie Belle's Drop Cloth Chalk Mineral Paint. We're going to be doing some decoupage, and in the center I want to have a nice white or a cream so that my decoupage paper can show to its best advantage. And I'm going to continue until I have all of these completely painted and then let them dry. Remember, you can find a full product list in the description below, and most of these products on our website, theprovincialfarmhouse.com.au. Next, I'm going to be using AB Studios Birds Cameo rice paper. There are so many beautiful designs on this sheet, and I think they'll be perfect for this project. So I have a frame that is the same as one of the ones that we've already done, but it doesn't have a center. I'm just using that as a guide, and I have some water on my paintbrush, and I'm just marking out where I need to tear my paper. Remember, tearing your decoupage paper makes it easier for you to blend it. It looks more seamless and less harsh than a cut line from scissors. So I've just laid down that water, and then I'm very carefully ripping my paper. Once I have my little artwork ready for that larger frame, I'm going to grab a couple more of these sweet little birds using another one of the frame castings as a guide. Now that I have my little artworks organized, I'm going to lay them on top of the frames and work out if I need to take off any excess rice paper. And if I need to do that, I'm using my artist brush with some more of that water. I'm running it along the edge that I need to trim off, and then I'm very carefully ripping. I'm then going to be using Dixie Belle's Flat Clear Coat as my decoupage medium today. I'm laying down product in the center, and then I'm carefully positioning my rice paper over the top and then using my brush to smooth it down. And then I will add a little bit more product as well over the top to seal everything in. I'll be repeating the same process for each of these little frames. Once my paper was completely dry, I decided that I wanted to try and blend some of the edges a little bit. So I'm taking some of Dixie Belle's Mint Julep. I'm using a mister to water it down a little bit. And now I'm going to add some of that Mint Julep paint with an artist brush around the edges just to try and blend that artwork in, to try and make it look like it goes to the edge of the frame. So this is going to be something I have to play with. I'm mainly using the Mint Julep on these two pieces, and because I've watered down the paint, it is a very soft look, and I can easily go in and wipe some of that away if I want, because remember, we have sealed that decoupage paper, so you've definitely got some room to play here. You can see this third artwork here had a much larger space that we had to try and fill in. So again, I'm coming in with that Mint Julep on my artist brush, and having it watered down is really helping. If I get any on the little bird itself, you'll see I just use my fingers just to dab that away and just to soften that look. But I think it's important to not only go around the outside where the gap is, but also onto the rice paper itself. And now I have some of Dixie Belle's Savannah Mist. I have watered that down a little bit, and I'm just alternating between that color and the Mint Julep, as I really feel like these tones are blending together to create that pretty sky behind the bird. So I'm just going to continue to work until I have the area filled and it makes it look a bit more seamless. Once the paint is dry on each of these pieces, I will seal with a gloss clear coat. Now I need to work on the frame. So I'm using some of Paint Couture's Luxe Bronze Metallic. I have it on a small artist brush, and I'm going to work my way around the frame and paint that entire design. If I get some paint onto the art itself, because we've sealed it, I can use a wet wipe to wipe back any of the excess, and it's going to take about 1.5 coats. My second coat of this bronze paint will just be a touch up and hitting any areas that I may have missed. I'm repeating the same process on each of these little frames. Once that bronze paint is completely dry, I'm going to use some of Paint Couture's Crackle two-step process. I've got Crackle step 1 on my paintbrush. I'm going to put down a thin coat of that in the center of each of our little bird artworks. And then once they are dry, the surface will feel tacky, which means it's ready for step 2. So once it's dry but feels tacky, I'm going to come in with the Crackle step 2, and I'm applying about the same amount of product, so not too heavy, and then I'm going to let these dry. Once the center section with the Crackle medium is completely dry, I'm going to take some of Paint Couture's Van Dyke Brown Glaze. I've got a little bit on my paintbrush. I'm then going to use a mister to water it down. It is a water-based product, so you can do this. I then have a little bit of our watered down mixture on my paintbrush, and I'm going to very lightly go over the top of the center there. And you can see that it will start catching all of those beautiful cracks. And I'm going to repeat the same process for each of our little bird artworks. I'm definitely going for a vintage aged effect here, but if this was not to your liking, you could definitely leave the Crackle and the Glaze step out. And here's a look at the finished projects. I love how these turned out. We can't always find beautiful frames like this when we're at the thrift stores, so it's great to know that this is an option. Let me know what you think of these in the comments. For our next project, we're going to work on the IOD mold that we cast earlier, and just like before, I'm going to give this a coat of Dixie Belle's Drop Cloth Chalk Mineral Paint. Once my paint has completely dried, I'm going to use another piece from that Cameo Birds rice paper. This lovely larger design here would be perfect. I'm actually going to trim it out to start off with. I thought about having it in the center with just a round shape, making it look a little bit like it had been framed out in the center. But in the end, I did decide to soften the edge with some water, just like we did with the other pieces, just so that the transition between the two different sections in the artwork aren't going to be as harsh. I'm then going to be using Dixie Belle's Flat Clear Coat as my decoupage medium. Again, I'm going to lay down a coat of that in the center, and then I'm going to very carefully put my little bird artwork in the center, and I'm going to use some more of that product over the top to seal it all in. And just like the previous little artworks, once my sealer is completely dry, I'm going to use some watered down Savannah Mist and Mint Julep, and I'm going to go in and start adding that paint to try and blend the center out. I want it to look like the sky behind this sweet little bird. I want it to look like one square artwork, and it's not going to be completely perfect, but I want to make it a lot softer and less obvious that I've just decoupaged an image in the center. Once the paint is dry, I'm going to seal with some more of Dixie Belle's flat clear coat, and when the sealer is dry, I'm going to grab some of that Crackle Step 1, and just like with the previous artworks, I'm going to lay down Step 1 in a thin coat, and once that's dry and tacky, I will use Step 2 over the top and let that dry. When Step 2 is dry, I'm going to use some more of that watered down Van Dyke Brown glaze mixture, and I'm going to very lightly go over the top of our dry crackle, and this is going to set into all of those wonderful cracks that we created and also help blend the artwork, again, just to make it look like a more seamless piece. And then once that's dry, I am going to use some more of that Luxe Bronze Metallic by Paint Couture on the frame. Now I'm happy for these to just look cute sitting on a shelf, but if you want to have these be able to be hung, you could definitely super glue some little hanging attachments to the back of each of these frames. They're very light, so super glue would definitely do the trick holding your picture hanger in place. And here's the finished product. I'm really happy with how this turned out, and I hope it's given you some ideas on how you can use IOD's Frames mold. I really hope that you've enjoyed today's video and that it's given you some ideas on how you can create some art for your home using resin, molds, and decoupage paper. Let me know if you had a favorite project from today. If you enjoyed today's video, I would really appreciate it if you would hit that like button, comment, and share it out. I hope that you enjoyed today's video collection, and if you haven't already, I would love it if you would hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so that you don't miss out on any of our videos. You can find the products used today on our website, theprovincialfarmhouse.com.au. Thanks for watching.